Bluetooth speaker now is, all right, hopefully no.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Ashley Land. I'm so excited for day 3 of our Revolution is Now election series. I'm here with this amazing, wonderful, talented individual, and we are going to have a really candid discussion about voter suppression. And when we think about everything going on right now in the world, I think it's something that we definitely need to be talking about. But first, I'm going to just throw it to amazing discussion participant to introduce herself.
Yeah, thanks, Ashley. I'm Shaniqua McClendon. I'm the political director at Crooked Media, which is a progressive media company that's based out here in LA.
Yes, and beforehand, I know because all of the different segments have been at 7, but we had to, of course, watch the vice presidential debate that just took place. I wanted to see if you have any major takeaways, just a quick throw in there, any of your thoughts.
Yeah, Mike Pence did not do well. He did bad overall, but when asked about Breonna Taylor, said that systematic racism did not exist. That's just him doing him. But I thought Kamala did a really good job. She was really prepared, and everything he said, she got him together on it.
Yes, I loved the I'm speaking and the glare, just every time he'd answer the question. But I agree. I think where I really tuned it off was him and his response to the question about Breonna Taylor and George Floyd. Yeah. It was just it's so clear that you just don't care. It was you had no empathy at all. And
right.
So it's really getting real. We are 27 days away from election or something like that. And so
yeah, close. And people are voting already.
And people are voting. People have voted. People like you have already voted. And so it's gonna be a wild ride to November 3rd. But I really wanted to have this conversation with you about voter suppression because I feel like we don't talk about it enough, and especially everything that's going on with coronavirus and lack of polling places and just the budget cuts to USPS and mail-in ballots. I feel like we just need to have a broader discussion about voter suppression in general. And so to start off, in your own words, could you kind of explain what voter suppression is?
Yeah, I think the simplest way to think about it is anything that makes voting unnecessarily difficult, but a little bit more specifically than that, makes it unnecessarily difficult so that whoever's making those decisions can control the outcome of the election. So instead of letting people choose who their elected officials are, the elected officials are, in some instances, creating laws that make it hard for people to vote. And then in other instances, which I'm sure we'll get to later in the conversation, doing what Donald Trump is telling people to do, go to the polls and scare people so they'll go home, which is illegal because it's voter intimidation.
Exactly. And just in the vice presidential debate, it was just such a interesting dynamic of just what is the truth? We don't know what the truth is.
I know.
Exactly. And so my next question is kind of just what are some different forms of voter suppression? Because I feel like when we think about it, a lot of times we think of how Black people didn't have the right to vote and how it was systematically written into law that because you're of the color of your skin, you can vote. But voter suppression is very alive today, and it has a very modern view as well.
Yeah, and that is, voter suppression is always scary, but I don't want to say at least back in the day it was better, but at least you saw it for what it was. You saw that a poll tax was literally saying, we know that Black people won't be able to answer these questions. Well, white people probably couldn't answer them either, but they weren't asking white people those questions. So,
exactly.
You could easily pinpoint things as voter suppression and say that's what it is. But when you think about things like voter ID, most people are like, oh, I have an ID, what's the problem? But there are a lot of people who actually cannot afford to unfortunately purchase identification. And you think about a lot of younger people who just are opting out of driving and don't see the need to go get a driver's license. And so they might not have ID until maybe they turn 21, want to get a drink or something.
Right.
But, you also think about older Black Americans who don't have any of their birth documents. And so if you don't have those documents, or you need to get them, if you don't have them, you can't get identification. But if you need to get them, they can be costly. And if you're having to drive around to a bunch of different places, that's gas money. That means you need a car. That means you need to be able to drive, or find someone else who can take you around to do that. So, again, if someone who, lives, I'm from North Carolina, most people drive to get around, they're thinking, oh, I have ID. What's the problem? But they're not thinking about the people who are not in the same circumstances as them, thinking about purging the voter rolls. So, election officials are required to remove people from voter rolls that have moved or who have passed away, just to keep the rolls clean. A lot of Republicans will use this as an opportunity to say, hey, we're just cleaning up the voter rolls, but they'll purge a lot of people who have voted before, or say, you haven't voted, so we're going to take that right away from you. And they do all these things. And again, that was meant to get rid of, to remove people who have passed away or who have moved, not people who still want to vote. But again, they can point to these things and they have some justification that most people would say, oh, I really don't see what the problem is. And then, by coincidence, all of those justifications somehow affect Black and brown people the most. They affect low income people the most. They affect young people the most. And so it's hard for me to believe that, they just accidentally found the things that disenfranchise people, who probably won't vote for them. And it just works out that way. It's definitely intentional.
Yeah, and just speaking a little bit more about just disenfranchised people, like who is most impacted by voter suppression, and why do you think that is?
Yeah. So, I think at the beginning of time, it was this country, it was anyone who wasn't a property owning white man. And as we've gotten further into and closer to where we are now, it's pretty much people who don't typically support Republicans. I think we saw this focused a lot on the Black community and other communities of color, but now, and it really hit after Barack Obama won, quite frankly. We had never had a Black president before, and a lot of people saw what happens when you have a diverse candidate on the ticket. Black and brown people showed up for Barack Obama, and Republicans were like, oh, we don't need that to happen again. And so they started passing all of these laws to really limit how people vote. And a specific example in North Carolina, again, going back to the intentionality of these things, they passed a voter ID law, or they passed a voter suppression law in general, but two things that were in it, voter ID, and they cut early voting days. They looked at the types of identification that Black people use the most, and they said that those were not eligible to be used as voter identification. And then they looked at the days during early voting that Black people tended to vote, which a lot of Black people voted on Sundays because they would go to church and then head to the polls. They cut Sunday voting. And so, again, very strategic ways. And so the same people are hurt, typically low income, typically Black and brown people, but also now they've started doing it to young people. And so there are efforts now to, in New Hampshire, I can't remember if this has been overturned or not, but after the 2016 election, Hillary Clinton barely won in New Hampshire. It was one of the closest. I don't think people talk about it a lot because she did win, but it was one of her smallest margins of victory. They passed a law where college students, if they wanted to vote with their college address, had to change they had to get a license or identification for that state, Whoa. Even if they weren't from there. And that cost about $300. Now, some adult who has a well-paying job might say, okay, what's wrong with that? But for a college student, where are they going to get $300 to do that? And so things like that. But when you look at all of the groups, it's people who typically don't vote for Republicans.
Exactly. And you did a series through Cricket Media that kind of highlighted the experiences of voter suppression and really talked about the issues. Can you talk a little bit about that and talk about something that you were unexpectedly, surprisingly learned that you weren't expecting to learn?
Yeah. So that series was yeah, the point of it was to highlight voter suppression, specifically in North Carolina. And, you know, I mean, we talked about things that I was aware of, but not the details on how some of that stuff was happening. And, you know, we talked about gerrymandering. So I worked on Capitol Hill for about 6 years. And when I started, our North Carolina House delegation had 7 Democrats and 6 Republicans. And after redistricting happened, they gerrymandered the district so bad that we ended up with 10 Republicans and 3 Democrats. And this is in a state that is pretty much split down the middle with Republicans and Democrats, but they managed to take 10 of 13 seats in the House. And so we explored gerrymandering in North Carolina. The maps have been struck down so many times as unconstitutional, and they keep finding a way to try to redraw them so that they can still, quite frankly, like steal people's votes away. And the way that that is stealing people's votes is because they pack a lot of Black and brown people and Democrats into these districts that will, you know, surely vote for a Democrat, but then every other district surely will vote for a Republican. And the way that they draw them, one of my old boss, the district looks different now, but when I first started for her, it snaked like up and down the state. And she would always joke that and it was so thin, she would say, if you opened your car door anywhere, like the car door would be open in a different district because of how ridiculously they drew those lines. And so, yeah, the podcast explored that. But I think the biggest thing I took away from it was an illegal form of voter suppression. The podcast centered around election fraud that happened in 2018 in North Carolina's 9th district, where a Republican consultant, again, targeting Black and brown people, went into Black communities and Indigenous communities. And in North Carolina, it is against the law to pick up someone's ballot. People have to drop off their own ballots. They have to put them in the mail themselves. They have to take care of everything on their own. They were going to people's homes and saying, hey, did you fill out your ballot? I can help you with that. Most voters don't know that it's illegal to have someone else drop off your ballot, but they weren't just taking closed ballots and saying, hey, I'll deliver this for you. They were taking open ballots, and they were getting rid of some. They were changing votes on some and effectively disenfranchising these voters. And it just, I still get mad thinking about it, because what they ended up doing was redoing the election. They had this big investigation, and the Republican who was running, who used this consultant, said he wasn't going to run again because I think he knew, you know, by the skin of his teeth did not get into more trouble. So he just decided to kind of back out. But the Democrat ended up losing by around 900 votes. And so they have another election with a new candidate, and the new Republican wins. And all I could think was, but that's not the race we were having. And the cheater didn't win, but the person who was running a good race and lost by 900 and something votes had to redo something that shouldn't have been redone, because, you know, they got a do-over. And those voters, you know, they had their votes stolen. And it just really let me know that people, you know, even when they have legal ways to disenfranchise you, they will go as far as they can.
Yeah. And I feel like we hear about voter suppression in like a lot of southern states. Is it happening more there, would you say, or is it just like we don't hear about it in other places?
It's definitely, I would say, most prevalent, at least intentionally. There are a lot of issues with our voting laws that suppress the vote in different ways, but it's not as intentional as in the South and the Midwest, I would say. Ohio, for instance, is one of those states who purged a lot of people from the voter rolls, you know, saying they were cleaning up the rolls, but really had incorrectly purged a ton of people. But it is, you know, mostly in the South, and it's our country's history. You know, slavery was more prevalent in the South. And so when enslaved people were freed, and then they got the right to vote, laws started being put in place after Reconstruction, Jim Crow laws, to prevent Black people from participating in democracy. And, you know, the Voting Rights Act was passed, but I would say all that did, you know, the same as we saw with Reconstruction, I think is what happened with the Voting Rights Act. a law was passed, and then people said, okay, how do we work around this to get the same outcome? And that is what we're just seeing kind of replay in the South over and over again.
Yeah, speaking of the Voter Rights Act, can you explain some of the recent controversy with it? Because I know like they were trying to overturn it and things like that, like a couple of years ago or a few years ago. And so what implications will that have if that like happens, and like what is like the recent status of it now?
Yeah, we're seeing the implications. So when the Voting Rights Act was passed, it was pretty much to overcome Jim Crow laws. So a lot of the efforts that arose in the South after Black people were given the right to vote with the 15th Amendment, Reconstruction happened, it was going well, and then a bunch of white people said, hey, we don't like this, and we started to revert back. And you saw a lot of these Jim Crow laws pop up that made it not just hard for people to vote, made it like deadly for Black people to vote. And so they did not participate. And then the Voting Rights Act pretty much said that you cannot discriminate against people for voting. And so something like a poll tax would be considered a type of discrimination, but essentially it was trying to really reaffirm what the 15th Amendment was supposed to do, which was just give, it gave Black men the right to vote, but, add the 19th Amendment to that, and then, allow Black people to vote. But in 2013, there was a court case that went to the Supreme Court, Shelby v. Holder, and the Supreme Court struck down a portion of the Voting Rights Act that required Southern states to get any changes to their election laws approved by the federal government. And so the Supreme Court got rid of that, which meant that these Southern states could now pass laws to change their election laws without any oversight from the federal government. Some of the reasoning from one of the justices who decided in favor of this decision was that, it must have worked already because, Barack Obama was elected. And, I'm not sure who wrote this dissent. I think it was Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Just that, an umbrella keeps you dry from the rain because you have the umbrella up, and you wouldn't put it down because it's kept you dry. And so once that was struck down, Southern states, North Carolina and Texas moved very quickly, but a lot of Southern states just started passing a lot of voter suppression laws, and there was no one to step in and say, hey, you can't do that. And so now they've just, kind of gone crazy. And now the Voting Rights Act, it had been reauthorized so many times in a bipartisan nature. Now it's this political football. And now, we can't get it reauthorized, but also Congress, well, Democrats at least, want to clarify the law or reinstate the section of the Voting Rights Act that has now allowed these Southern states to just kind of go crazy. But now it's political football. And so only Democrats want to do that. And until we get a majority in both chambers, which could happen this November, I also got to flip the White House.
Right. We can flip everything.
Yeah, we can hopefully fix that. But yeah, the Voting Rights Act was a really great piece of legislation, but the Supreme Court in 2013, unfortunately, took away a lot of its teeth.
Wow. And yesterday we talked about the Electoral College and how it works. I feel like this is a form of voter suppression, no? Because it literally, it's like you could have the popular vote, you could win by over 2 million votes, but you literally could still lose the election. What can we do about the Electoral College? I know they were saying it has to be rewritten in the law. Do you foresee that happening anytime soon? Has there been conversations about it?
Yeah, there are states who are, I don't know the exact term of what it is they're passing, but there are states who are putting forth laws that would say their electoral votes would go to whoever won the popular vote, not the, not their state's vote, but the popular vote nationwide. But I think it's only a handful of states. And, unfortunately, to have any constitutional changes, We would need 2/3 of the states to agree. I mean, first we would need 2/3 of Congress to agree, but then we would need 2/3 of the states to agree. And then, that's where you run into these same states who are, the same states who benefit from the Electoral College would be able to pull their weight and prevent something like that from happening. And I think you're right, it is voter suppression. You look at the people, again, I know I keep saying this, but the same people keep being negatively affected in these situations. And you look at the states who are overrepresented because, their votes count more because of the Electoral College, and they are mostly states full of white people. And again, Black and brown people are being told, and a lot of young people who live in cities, more urban areas, are being told your vote doesn't count as much. So do I see it changing anytime soon? No, but I think where we are now, we're having more conversations about the Electoral College being a problem. So, that's the first step, and hopefully one day someone will be brave enough to change it.
Yeah. I feel like locally, like local officials, do they have some type of power where they're able to enact laws or policies that fights against voter suppression? And if they do, like, do we see cases of that in states across the country?
Yeah, that is I think we should have some national election laws, but it is good that when we have people like Donald Trump in the White House and Republicans controlling the Senate, that we can rely on local government because they are in charge of these elections. And so, one thing, for instance, in Georgia, this is not a happy example, but the governor allowed some local officials to close a lot of polling locations. Again, these are polling locations in black neighborhoods, and that is a decision that is made locally. And so, if an election official, I hate even talking about this because you should just have enough polling locations for the people who live in a community. And so, what I'm about to say is actually, it's not being proactively good; it's just doing your job. But at the local level, election officials can decide to do their job in a fair way that doesn't disenfranchise people. And then I would say it's more so at the state level where, those aren't your election officials per se, but those are the folks who are writing the laws. And so we pay a lot of attention to federal and national politics, but state legislatures are the ones who are determining so much, and they are determining what voting systems look like in the state. I keep using North Carolina as an example because they just literally went crazy. But when the governor was elected, normally it's changed now, but I think it was like a 5-person elections board who managed the state's elections. And when a Democratic governor was elected, the Republican-led state legislature decided to pass laws to basically strip him of all of his power as governor. And another thing they did was make the board even. And so then it would just always be, no decisions being made because it was split. But typically, the reason the governor would be able to have 3 appointments is because he or she was elected to be the executive of the state. So they should be able to have a little bit more say in what's going on. And, state legislatures, I think we really need to pay a lot of attention there. And they play a huge role in whether or not your state is a voter suppression state.
Yeah. Looking at the grand scheme of things in the election, I feel like there's a lot of fear about because we're doing mail-in, a lot of people are going to be doing mail-in, like not all of the votes are going to get there like on November 3rd, specifically like during the election night results. And so people are scared that like Donald Trump is going to try to like declare victory, let's say, if he's like winning at the moment and like not all the votes are there. Like, A, can he do that? Is that legal? And then B, like, what can we do in order to make sure those votes are not suppressed?
Yeah. So one of the biggest reasons that young people's votes are not counted when they vote by mail is because they're late. And so just forget the deadlines, just do it now. If you have your ballot already, fill it out. And, I'll do a little plug for one of the tools we have. If you go to votesafeamerica.com, you can look up your state page and see all the information you need about, your options. If you feel like, oh, this is going to get back too late, what are my options to drop this off in person? We have all of that information there. But we also have a ballot tool where you can pull up your ballot and see information on all the candidates and statewide ballot initiatives, just to help you make decisions about who you want to vote for. But the biggest thing I would say is vote early, whether you do it in person or by mail, just get it out of the way. And then another reason that young people's ballots get rejected. Now, the overarching part of this is most young people don't vote by mail. And so when you don't do something a lot, you don't always do it the right way. So the other thing I would say is make sure you fill out the entire envelope, like know whatever your return process is. For North Carolina, you have to sign the envelope yourself, which you have to sign anywhere. You have to sign your envelope. But in North Carolina, for instance, you have to have a witness sign that you were the one who filled out your ballot. And in some states, you need more than one witness. But if you don't have that witness, your ballot will not be counted. And so read all of the instructions. Yeah, make sure you read all of the instructions that come with your ballot and follow everything to a T, double check it, triple check it, and then, return it however you plan on returning it. But do it early and do it thoroughly is the biggest thing I will say, so that we can get those results in as soon as possible on election day. And for Trump, I mean, I guess it's not illegal for him to say nonsense. He's been doing that the entire time that he's been in office. And I think we saw what happened in 2016. He won and he was still saying, people voted illegally. Like, he's always going to be saying something. So I think the important thing is if we get our votes in early enough, then there's less time for him to say that without the proof right in front of his face. But honestly, I hope the media doesn't feed into it. But if they do, we just have to not feed into that, because he's always going to be saying something.
Yeah, literally always saying something that's a lie, for sure. If you are in a district where you feel like, voter suppression is happening, or you feel like your vote was suppressed in person, per se, is there a way you can report it, or any way to rectify the situation?
Yeah. So two things. If you think your vote was suppressed in any way, I mean, you should check out the website, Election Protection. I don't want to mess it. I think it's electionprotection.org, but if you just Google election protection or 866-OUR-VOTE, you can call them while you're voting and say, hey, this is happening, and they will help you kind of walk through that. We also have again, on votesaveamerica.com, if you go to your state page, which, for instance, for California, would just be votesaveamerica.com/California. We have information on folks that you can contact in real time to report any issues you're having, and they will help you sort through it so you can make sure your vote is counted. And then on, just generally helping to fight voter suppression, if everyone votes early like they should, being a poll worker, being a poll monitor, so that you can be present and help people. And, poll monitors help make sure there's not any crazy stuff going on. And, there aren't people, trying to intimidate people to leave, and just doing voter suppression. And there's also, a lot of organizations. We actually, I guess that's the point of this. On our Vote Save America Instagram, we actually just put up some information about knowing your rights about voting. And so information is one of the best ways to fight voter suppression for yourself, because people bank on you not knowing what you actually have the right to do. And, for instance, a poll worker who maybe has, ill intentions, or I shouldn't even say that, they just don't know what they're doing. Maybe they haven't been trained properly. Will say, well, for this reason right here, you can't vote. And if you don't know for sure if that's accurate, you might believe them and just go home. So making sure you know what you have the right to do in your state is really important as well.
Yeah, and I feel like, especially with the signature thing, I keep hearing people scared about it not matching. If there's a case where you did do something wrong, can you go back and call someone or like get your ballot back and do it correctly, or like is it just over?
No, it's not over. So a lot of states, again, we have this on our Vote Save America state pages. You can go and so in some states they'll actually call you and say your ballot was rejected for this reason, and they'll give you a time frame to fix it. And not even fix it. Normally, if they can't verify your signature, because your signature is how they identify you. And so what they need to do in place of that is have you confirm your identity. So that some states will reach out to you so that you can do that. Not all states do that, but a lot of states do allow you to track your ballot. So if you go to our Vote Save America pages, your state page, we have the link where you can track your ballot in whatever state you live in. And so I would just say, again, get your ballot in as soon as you can, and then go to that website and just keep an eye on it. And if, too much time goes by, call your local election officials and say, hey, I mean, we have this on the pages too. I sent my ballot in. It doesn't look like it's been received yet. And if it has been received and it's been rejected, call them and say, hey, what do I need to do to make sure this is counted? So I feel like election officials should be helping us out more, but since they're not, just stay on them, watch your ballot, track it. And if something doesn't look right, call your local election officials. If it's been rejected, call your local election officials and figure out what you need to do to make sure it's counted.
Yes, that's amazing. I didn't even know that. So that's good information to know. Like you were saying, information is key. So at this point, if you all have questions, drop them in the chat. But while we wait on if anyone has questions, I've been asking the same question to everyone on the series. And that is, what would you say to someone who is disenfranchised or just apathetic about voting, to make them, want to vote if they have, the right to vote?
Yeah. I completely understand anyone who's like, I don't think this is going to change anything. It's been the same. We are in, I don't know how else to describe it, but just like a crazy time right now. And I'm even going to take a step back. Well, I'll finish that thought. We're in a crazy time right now. I think there are very few other times that we can point to in history where your vote would have so much of an impact, depending on who wins the presidential election. The president yesterday said that he is not going to negotiate on any coronavirus relief package until he's reelected. People are about to start being evicted. Like, the holidays are coming. It is cold. I guess not in LA, but like there are so many places where it's cold and people are going to be kicked out with their kids. And that alone, there will be a stark difference if Joe Biden is elected. But just generally, I understand why people kind of feel like this system is not helping them. It's not serving them the way that everyone tells us it will. But we can't look at voting as just the only thing that we do. Of course, vote, but we have to hold elected officials accountable. And if they are not doing what we want them to do, you can run against them, like you can vote for someone else, but we have to be active. We can't just put our vote and sit back and then in 4 years say, well, they didn't do anything for me. At the end of the day, politicians respond to the people who are voting and the people who are in their faces every day saying, I need you to do this and this and this. When I worked on Capitol Hill, we, when I started, I was answering phones. You would hear from there were some people that you just knew them. You knew them by name because it called all the time. They made sure that the senator or congresswoman knew how they felt. But I started to realize most people are not engaging in that same way. And that is even more important at the local level. You can run into your elected officials in the grocery store, go to city council meetings, and I don't know a better word to use, but like confront them for the things that they are not doing. And I know it might sound like a lot, but if they are not doing those things, anyone can run for office. Well, there are restrictions, but for the most part, a lot of people can run for office. And I know it sounds like a crazy thing to say, but there are so many organizations out here now that will help you. And elected officials need to be afraid they're going to lose. That is how that's what makes them respond. Should it be that way? No. People who want to do good work and represent people should be the people who run for office. Unfortunately, that is not generally the case. We're seeing that change with, the election of people like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Cori Bush, and Ayanna Pressley. But by and large, that's not the case. So we really just have to hold people's feet to the fire, and like, protests matter, showing up to offices matter, voting matters, but we can't just leave it at voting. And so I don't think people are ever going to feel like voting is sufficient, because by itself it's actually not. We have to engage in like everything that comes with it. And the final thing I'll say is, I know it is true that, especially for Black people, life looks very similar under both parties. But I always push back on that a bit, especially now when I think that, marginalized communities are really telling the Democratic Party, you can't just keep taking us for granted. But being president doesn't give you, authority to do whatever you want. Electing Joe Biden isn't enough. We also have to flip the Senate. We have to keep the House. We also have to make sure our state legislatures have the people we want, our governorships, our mayoral seats. There are so many positions that have to all be filled for this to all work together. And so, again, we can't hang everything on Joe Biden because he can't do everything. We have to look at all of these positions and start to change who's in them. And then that is how we start to see the change, because look, again, coronavirus. The House passed a bill how many months ago, and Mitch McConnell has not taken it up. You can't even blame Trump for that because he hasn't had a bill to refuse yet. So,
yes. Yes. It looks like there's no questions, but I would love for you to just plug any like organizations people can get involved with, or like learn more about voter suppression, and how to fight against it, and like what you do at Cricket Media as well.
Yeah. On the voter suppression front, Stacey Abrams has a great organization called Fair Fight. We helped raise a couple $1 million for them last year, and they essentially, we all saw what happened in Georgia, and Stacey Abrams is trying to prevent that from happening throughout the country, because Georgia was an egregious example of the person who runs the elections being in the election and still running it and working things out in his favor so that he could steal the election. But it's happening all over the country. And so she started Fair Fight to help be proactive. Oftentimes it's October and we're like, oh, we got to fight the voter suppression. And she started last year. And then I will plug Vote Save America, which is it's kind of our voting resource. It has information for people who just need to know, what are my deadlines? What do I need to do to make sure my vote is counted? We have all of that information, but we also have ways for you to get involved if you want to do more than that. If you want to sign up to be a poll worker, if you want to volunteer to help a candidate, if you want to donate to a candidate and have your money go to the most impactful places, we have all of that information on the site. And then what I do at Crooked, pretty much our founders started the company because they did not like the way the media handled the 2016 election, but also realized that when you watch the news, you just hear about all the bad stuff that's happening. And, they talk about all the bad stuff that's happening on our main show, Pod Save America, but they also wanted people to have a way to actually fix the things that they were talking about and take action. And that's pretty much what my job is, to figure out how can we plug people, their time, their money, and just energy and resources into things that will hopefully lead us toward a more progressive, just country.
Amazing. Well, I just want to thank you once again for taking time to talk with us. And I feel like I know so much more now and am so much more prepared to, go into this election season and not be suppressed with my vote. Because like you said, information and knowledge is key, and we have to continue to like spread this information with each other. And so thank you once again for chatting with me, and I hope everyone tunes in for the final night of the series tomorrow at 7 p.m. We're talking about the Black Lives Matter movement and what the Black agenda should be this election season and also moving forward. And so I'm super, super, super happy about this series, and just like people like Shaniqua coming on and just having brilliant, authentic conversations. And so I hope to see you all tomorrow, and please stay safe out